There's something unsettling about a person who has complete control over their mind. Something that makes others uncomfortable, even threatened. It's not arrogance or aggression that creates this effect. It's the quiet certainty of someone who has mastered their inner world so completely that external chaos cannot touch them. Most people spend their entire lives as prisoners of their own thoughts, slaves to their emotions, victims of their mental programming. They react instead of respond. They crumble under pressure instead of rising to meet it. They let fear dictate their choices and doubt poison their potential. But there exists a small percentage of individuals who have broken free from this mental slavery. They've built minds so disciplined, so resilient, so unshakably strong, that their very presence makes others question their own mental weakness. These people don't just think differently, they operate from an entirely different level of consciousness. Today, you're going to learn how to become one of them. You're going to discover the exact strategies, techniques, and psychological principles that will transform your mind from a source of limitation into your greatest weapon. By the end of this journey, you won't just be mentally stronger. You'll possess the kind of mental dominance that makes others recognize they're in the presence of someone who has achieved what most never will: complete mastery over their own mind. Chapter 1. The mental warfare inside you. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a war raging inside your head. It's a battle between two versions of yourself: the person you are and the person you could become, the person limited by fear, doubt, and past programming, versus the person who could achieve anything they set their mind to. Most people never realize this war is happening. They live their entire lives unconsciously, letting their subconscious programming run the show. They wake up with the same limiting thoughts, react to challenges with the same fearful patterns, and go to bed having made the same excuses for why they didn't pursue their potential. This internal warfare is not a metaphor, it's a biological reality. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, and every single thought you think strengthens certain neural pathways while weakening others. Every time you choose courage over fear, you're literally rewiring your brain for strength. Every time you choose comfort over growth, you're programming yourself for weakness. The tragedy is that most people are unknowingly fighting for the wrong side. They're reinforcing the neural pathways of limitation, fear, and self-doubt. They tell themselves they're not smart enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough. And their brain, being the incredible pattern recognition machine that it is, works tirelessly to prove these limiting beliefs true. But here's what separates mentally strong individuals from the masses. They understand that thoughts are not facts. They recognize that the voice in their head telling them they can't do something is just old programming, not absolute truth. They've learned to observe their thoughts with detachment, to question their internal narrative, and to consciously choose which mental programs to run. This is where true mental strength begins, with the recognition that you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. You are the one who gets to decide which thoughts to entertain and which ones to dismiss. Most people are so identified with their thinking that they believe every random thought that pops into their head. Mentally strong individuals have created space between themselves and their thoughts. Consider this: every successful person you admire, every individual who has achieved something remarkable, every leader who has influenced the world, they all had to win this internal war first. They had to overcome the same doubts, fears, and limitations that everyone faces. The difference is they refuse to surrender to their mental weakness. The voice that tells you you're not ready, that you should wait until tomorrow, that you're not good enough. This is not your voice. This is the voice of your conditioning, your past failures, your inherited fears. Mentally strong people learn to recognize this voice for what it is: a security system that's trying to keep you safe by keeping you small. But safety and strength are incompatible. You cannot build mental resilience while avoiding mental challenges. You cannot develop emotional control while hiding from situations that trigger emotions. You cannot become unshakable while only operating within your comfort zone. The first step in building a mind so strong it scares people is acknowledging that you've been at war with yourself, and up until now, you've been losing. You've been surrendering to the weaker version of yourself every time you chose comfort over growth, every time you listened to doubt instead of taking action, every time you allowed fear to make your decisions for you. This ends now. From this moment forward, you're going to fight for the strongest version of yourself. You're going to question every limiting thought, challenge every fearful assumption, and refuse to let your past programming dictate your future potential. Chapter 2. Why most people fear mental strength. There's an uncomfortable truth about mental strength that most people don't want to acknowledge. It makes others deeply uncomfortable. When you develop genuine mental discipline, emotional control, and unshakable confidence, you become a mirror that reflects everyone else's mental weakness back at them. Think about the last time you were around someone who seemed completely unaffected by the chaos that was stressing everyone else out. Someone who remained calm while others panicked, who spoke with quiet confidence while others complained, who took action while others made excuses. Did their presence inspire you, or did it make you feel somehow inadequate? For most people, encountering genuine mental strength triggers their own insecurities. They see someone who has achieved what they haven't, and instead of being inspired, they feel threatened. They see someone who refuses to participate in collective complaints about how hard life is, and it makes them uncomfortable about their own victim mentality. This is why mentally strong individuals often find themselves isolated, not because they're antisocial, but because their very presence challenges the comfortable narratives that most people use to justify their limitations. When you stop making excuses, others feel judged for making theirs. When you refuse to participate in negative conversations, others feel exposed in their negativity. Society has a strange relationship with mental strength. We claim to admire it, but when we encounter it in real life, we often try to tear it down. We call mentally strong people lucky, privileged, or cold. We look for ways to explain their strength that don't require us to examine our own weakness. The truth is, most people are addicted to their mental limitations. They're comfortable being victims of their circumstances because it removes the responsibility to change. They prefer to believe that some people are just naturally, mentally strong, rather than accepting that mental strength is a choice that requires work. This is why developing genuine mental strength can be a lonely journey. As you become less reactive, others might accuse you of not caring. As you become more disciplined, others might say, "You're obsessed." As you become more confident, others might call you arrogant. These accusations aren't about you. They're about their discomfort with your growth. Mentally weak individuals need others to be weak with them. They bond over shared complaints, mutual limitations, and collective excuses. They create comfort in shared mediocrity. When someone in their circle starts developing real mental strength, it threatens this dynamic. But here's what you need to understand. Their discomfort with your growth is confirmation that you're on the right path. If your mental development doesn't challenge anyone, if your growth doesn't make anyone uncomfortable, then you're probably not growing very much. People fear mental strength in others because it forces them to confront the possibility that their own mental weakness is a choice. It's easier to believe that some people are just naturally confident, naturally resilient, naturally disciplined, than to accept that these qualities can be developed through conscious effort. When you refuse to be dragged down by negative people, when you won't participate in victim mentality, when you respond to challenges with strength instead of complaints, you become a walking reminder of what's possible. This makes mentally weak people extremely uncomfortable because it shatters their illusions about why they haven't achieved what they want in life. The fear others have of your mental strength is actually reverence disguised as discomfort. Deep down, they recognize that you've achieved something they haven't. They see that you operate from a different level of mental discipline. And part of them wishes they had what you have. But instead of being inspired to develop their own strength, they often try to bring you down to their level. This is why you must be prepared for resistance as you develop mental strength. Expect people to question your methods, to criticize your discipline, to try to convince you that you're taking things too seriously. Understand that this resistance is not about you. It's about their fear of what you represent. Proof that mental weakness is optional. Chapter 3. The Science of Building an Unbreakable Mind. Your brain is not fixed. This might be the most important thing you learn today. Every time you challenge a limiting belief, every time you choose courage over comfort, every time you persist through difficulty, instead of giving up, you are literally changing the physical structure of your brain. This phenomenon is called neuroplasticity, and it's the scientific foundation for everything we're going to discuss. Your brain has approximately 100 trillion neural connections, and these connections are constantly being strengthened or weakened based on your thoughts, actions, and experiences. When you repeatedly think fearful thoughts, you strengthen fear pathways. When you repeatedly choose confident action, you strengthen confidence pathways. Most people don't understand this, so they remain trapped by their past programming. They believe that because they've always been anxious, they'll always be anxious. Because they've always struggled with confidence, they'll always struggle with confidence. Because they've always been mentally weak, they'll always be mentally weak. But neuroscience has proven this belief completely wrong. Your brain is like a muscle. It adapts to whatever you demand of it. If you consistently demand strength, resilience, and confidence from your brain, it will literally rewire itself to provide these qualities more easily. The key is understanding that neuroplasticity works both ways. Every thought you think is either making you stronger or weaker. Every response to challenge is either building mental resilience or mental fragility. There is no neutral. You are either consciously programming your mind for strength or unconsciously allowing it to default to weakness. Here's how the process works. When you encounter a challenging situation, your brain automatically searches for past experiences to determine how to respond. If your past programming says, "This is dangerous, I can't handle this," or "I should avoid this," your brain will trigger fear responses designed to keep you safe by keeping you small. But when you consciously choose to respond with strength instead of fear, you create a new neural pathway. The first time is difficult because you're going against established programming. But each time you make the same strong choice, you make that pathway stronger and the weak pathway weaker. This is why mentally strong people seem to get stronger under pressure while weak people crumble. It's not that they don't experience fear or doubt. It's that they've trained their brains to default to strength responses instead of weakness responses. The most powerful aspect of neuroplasticity is that it's happening constantly, whether you're aware of it or not. Right now, as you listen to these words and imagine yourself becoming mentally stronger, you're creating new neural pathways associated with strength and confidence. Your brain is beginning to accept this new identity as possible. But here's the crucial part. Neuroplasticity requires repetition. You can't just think strong thoughts once and expect permanent change. You have to consistently challenge weak thoughts, consistently choose strong actions, and consistently reinforce the mental patterns you want to develop. This is where most people fail. They want instant transformation without consistent effort. They want to feel confident without repeatedly choosing confident actions. They want to be mentally strong without putting their mind through the training that creates mental strength. Building an unbreakable mind requires the same approach as building physical strength. Progressive overload. You start with small challenges and gradually increase the difficulty. You don't try to lift the heaviest weight on your first day at the gym. And you don't try to overcome your biggest fears on your first day of mental training. Every time you do something that scares you slightly, you're building courage neural pathways. Every time you persist through discomfort instead of quitting, you're building resilience pathways. Every time you control your emotional response instead of reacting automatically, you're building emotional regulation pathways. The beautiful thing about this process is that it compounds. Each act of mental strength makes the next act easier. Each time you choose growth over comfort, you expand your comfort zone. Each time you prove to yourself that you can handle more than you thought, you increase your confidence in your ability to handle whatever comes next. This is why mentally strong people often seem like they're operating from a completely different reality. They're not superhuman. They've just trained their brains to respond to challenges with strength instead of fear, with curiosity instead of anxiety, with excitement instead of dread. Chapter 4. Emotional control that intimidates others. There's something profoundly unsettling about a person who cannot be emotionally manipulated. Someone who remains calm when others are losing their minds. Someone who responds thoughtfully when others react impulsively. Someone who maintains their center when everyone else is being pulled into emotional chaos. Most people are emotional slaves. They wake up and immediately check their emotions to see how they're supposed to feel that day. They let other people's moods determine their moods. They allow external circumstances to dictate their internal state. They react to every trigger, respond to every provocation, and surrender their emotional power to anyone who knows how to push their buttons. But individuals with true emotional mastery operate from a completely different paradigm. They understand that emotions are data, not commands. They feel their emotions fully, but they don't let emotions make their decisions. They recognize that emotional reactions are often based on past programming, not present reality. This level of emotional control is intimidating to others because it represents a kind of power that most people don't even know is possible. When you can remain calm in chaos, confident in uncertainty, and composed under pressure, you become someone that others instinctively recognize as operating from a higher level. The first step in developing intimidating emotional control is understanding what emotions actually are. Emotions are biochemical responses designed to help you survive. Fear alerts you to potential danger. Anger gives you energy to fight threats. Sadness helps you process loss. These are all valuable functions, but they were designed for a world very different from the one we live in today. Your ancient brain doesn't distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a difficult conversation with your boss. It doesn't differentiate between a physical threat and an emotional challenge. It responds to modern stressors with ancient programming, triggering fight-or-flight responses that are often completely inappropriate for the situation. Emotionally weak people are controlled by these ancient programs. They feel angry, so they act angry. They feel afraid, so they avoid challenges. They feel sad, so they withdraw from life. They've never learned that there's a space between stimulus and response, a space where choice lives. Emotionally strong people have expanded this space. They feel emotions just as intensely as everyone else, but they've trained themselves to pause before responding. In that pause, they evaluate. Is this emotion giving me useful information? Is the action this emotion is pushing me toward aligned with my goals? Is this the best way to respond to this situation? This pause, this space between feeling and action, is where true power lives. It's the difference between being a victim of your emotions and being the master of them. And when others see you consistently operating from this space, it makes them deeply uncomfortable with their own emotional reactivity. Most people use emotions to justify their actions. I was angry, so I yelled. I was scared, so I didn't try. I was sad, so I stayed in bed. They've made emotions more powerful than their conscious will. They've given emotions veto power over their decisions. But emotionally masterful individuals understand that emotions are advisory, not mandatory. They listen to their emotions for information, but they make decisions based on their values, goals, and rational assessment of the situation. They might feel fear, but they act with courage. They might feel anger, but they respond with wisdom. They might feel sadness, but they continue moving forward. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. Emotional suppression is just another form of emotional weakness. It's letting fear of emotions control you instead of letting the emotions themselves control you. True emotional mastery involves feeling emotions fully while choosing your response consciously. The process of developing this level of emotional control requires training your nervous system to handle intensity without losing your center. This means deliberately exposing yourself to emotional challenges in controlled ways. It means learning to breathe deeply when your body wants to tense up. It means practicing conscious response when your brain wants to react automatically. One of the most powerful techniques for developing emotional mastery is the practice of emotional labeling. When you feel a strong emotion, instead of being swept away by it, you observe it with curiosity. You say to yourself, "I notice I'm feeling anger," or "I'm experiencing fear right now," or "there's sadness present." This simple act of labeling creates distance between you and the emotion. It transforms you from someone who is angry to someone who is experiencing anger. It shifts you from being the emotion to observing the emotion. This shift is the beginning of emotional mastery. Another crucial aspect of intimidating emotional control is learning to regulate your energy independently of external circumstances. Most people are energy vampires. They need constant external validation, positive interactions, and favorable circumstances to maintain their emotional state. But emotionally strong individuals generate their own emotional energy. They don't need others to be happy for them to be happy. They don't need perfect circumstances to feel confident. They don't need constant reassurance to feel secure. This independence is intimidating because it means they can't be controlled through emotional manipulation. Chapter 5. Breaking free from mental weakness. Mental weakness is not a permanent condition. It's a habit. A habit of thinking that was programmed into you through years of conditioning, repeated failures, and absorbed limitations. But like any habit, it can be broken. Like any program, it can be rewritten. Like any pattern, it can be changed. The first step in breaking free from mental weakness is recognizing it for what it is: a collection of thought patterns that no longer serve you. These patterns feel real because they've been repeated so many times, but they're not truth, they're just very strong habits. Mental weakness shows up in predictable ways. It's the voice that immediately says, "I can't," when faced with a challenge. It's the tendency to focus on problems instead of solutions. It's the habit of seeking comfort instead of growth. It's the pattern of making excuses instead of taking responsibility. It's the default of choosing what's easy instead of what's necessary. These patterns feel natural because they've been your default for so long. Your brain has created efficient neural superhighways for these responses. When you encounter difficulty, your brain automatically routes to thoughts like, "This is too hard," "I'm not good enough," or "I should quit." But here's what you need to understand. These thoughts are not facts about reality. They're just your brain running old software. Your brain is trying to keep you safe by keeping you in familiar territory, even if that familiar territory is limitation and mediocrity. Breaking free requires you to become conscious of these patterns and interrupt them. Every time you catch yourself thinking a weak thought, you have a choice point. You can either let the thought run its course and reinforce the pattern, or you can consciously choose a stronger thought. This is not positive thinking or wishful thinking. This is conscious mental programming. Instead of, "I can't do this," you train yourself to think, "I'm learning how to do this." Instead of, "This is too difficult," you think, "This is exactly the kind of challenge I need to grow stronger." Instead of, "I might fail," you think, "I might succeed beyond my wildest expectations." The key is understanding that you're not trying to convince yourself of something false. You're choosing to focus on possibilities instead of limitations. You're choosing to emphasize your potential instead of your current constraints. You're choosing to see challenges as opportunities instead of threats. Mental weakness is also maintained by the company you keep. If you're surrounded by people who complain constantly, make excuses regularly, and settle for mediocrity consistently, their mental patterns will influence yours. The human brain is designed to mirror the patterns of people we spend time with. This means that breaking free from mental weakness often requires changing your environment. You need to distance yourself from people who reinforce weak thinking and surround yourself with individuals who model mental strength. You need to consume content that challenges you to grow, instead of content that validates your limitations. One of the most powerful ways to break weak mental patterns is through what psychologists call behavioral activation. This means taking strong action even when you don't feel like it. When your mind says, "I don't feel motivated," you exercise anyway. When your thoughts say, "I'm not ready," you take action anyway. When your emotions say, "This is uncomfortable," you lean into the discomfort anyway. Every time you act in opposition to weak thoughts, you weaken those neural pathways and strengthen pathways associated with courage, discipline, and strength. Your brain begins to learn that you don't have to feel ready to take action. You don't have to feel motivated to do what needs to be done. And you don't have to feel comfortable to grow. Another crucial element of breaking free from mental weakness is learning to find evidence of your strength instead of evidence of your weakness. Your brain is constantly looking for evidence to confirm your beliefs about yourself. If you believe you're weak, your brain will highlight every mistake, every failure, every moment of doubt. But if you train yourself to look for evidence of strength, your brain will begin noticing every moment of courage, every small victory, every sign of growth. This doesn't mean ignoring your areas for improvement or pretending you're already perfect. It means balanced assessment, instead of the negatively biased assessment that mental weakness creates. It means acknowledging both your current limitations and your growing capabilities. The process of breaking free from mental weakness also requires you to question the stories you tell yourself about why you haven't achieved what you want. Mental weakness loves stories like, "I don't have enough time," "I don't have the right connections," "I'm too old," "I'm too young," "I don't have enough money," or "I don't have enough experience." While these factors can create real challenges, they become mental weakness when you use them as reasons to stop trying, instead of problems to solve. Mentally strong individuals face the same constraints but focus on what they can control instead of what they can't control. Breaking free from mental weakness is ultimately about taking back control of your inner narrative. Instead of being the victim in your own story, you become the hero. Instead of being limited by your circumstances, you become empowered by your choices. Instead of being defined by your past, you become inspired by your potential. Chapter 6. The Daily Conditioning of Mental Dominance. Mental strength is not built in moments of inspiration. It's forged in the daily repetition of disciplines that most people find too boring, too difficult, or too uncomfortable to maintain. The difference between someone with intimidating mental strength and someone who crumbles under pressure is not talent, genetics, or luck. It's the accumulated effect of thousands of small choices made consistently over time. Every morning, you have a choice. You can either condition your mind for strength or allow it to default to weakness. Most people make this choice unconsciously. They wake up, immediately check their phone, flood their minds with other people's problems and opinions, and start their day in a reactive state. They've handed control of their mental state to external forces before they've even gotten out of bed. Mentally dominant individuals understand that the first hour of the day sets the tone for everything that follows. They guard this time fiercely because they know that how they start determines how they finish. While others are scrolling through social media, feeding their minds digital junk food, mentally strong people are programming their minds for excellence. The foundation of mental conditioning is taking control of your internal dialogue before the world tries to control it for you. Your brain generates approximately 60,000 thoughts per day, and most people let this happen randomly. They wake up and immediately begin thinking the same thoughts they thought yesterday, which leads to the same emotions they felt yesterday, which drives the same actions they took yesterday, which creates the same results they got yesterday. Breaking this cycle requires conscious intervention. Before your mind can default to its old programs, you need to deliberately install new ones. This means starting each day by consciously choosing who you want to be, how you want to feel, and what you want to accomplish. Not just what you want to do, but who you want to become in the process. The most powerful mental conditioning technique is visualization, but not the kind of wishful thinking that most people practice. This is neurological programming. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you consistently visualize yourself responding to challenges with strength, your brain begins creating neural pathways that make that response more automatic. But visualization without emotion is just daydreaming. You must feel the confidence, the strength, the certainty as you imagine yourself succeeding. You must experience the satisfaction of overcoming obstacles, the pride of maintaining your standards under pressure, the deep knowing that you can handle whatever comes your way. This emotional engagement tells your brain that this is important, that this is real, that this is who you are. Another critical component of daily conditioning is intentional discomfort. Mentally weak people spend their entire lives avoiding discomfort, which means they never develop the capacity to handle it. Mentally strong people deliberately seek out controlled discomfort because they understand that comfort and strength are incompatible. This doesn't mean creating unnecessary suffering. It means systematically exposing yourself to challenges that are slightly outside your comfort zone. Take cold showers when you want warmth, exercise when you feel tired, work when you want to relax, have difficult conversations when you want to avoid them. Each time you choose discomfort over comfort, you're training your brain to handle intensity without breaking. The most underestimated aspect of mental conditioning is the words you use to describe your experiences. Language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. If you consistently describe challenges as problems, your brain will approach them with problem-focused thinking. If you describe them as opportunities, your brain will look for possibilities instead of obstacles. Mentally dominant people have eliminated weak language from their vocabulary. They don't say, "I have to." They say, "I get to." They don't say, "I can't." They say, "I haven't learned how yet." They don't say, "That's impossible." They say, "That will require a new approach." Every word you speak is programming your subconscious mind to expect either success or failure. Daily mental conditioning also requires what psychologists call emotional rehearsal. Most people only think about how they want to respond to challenges after they're already in the middle of them. By then, it's too late. Your brain defaults to its existing programs under pressure. Mentally strong people rehearse their responses to likely scenarios before they happen. They imagine themselves staying calm in chaos, confident in uncertainty, and composed under criticism. They mentally practice maintaining their standards when it would be easier to compromise, pursuing their goals when motivation is low, and treating others with respect even when others don't deserve it. This rehearsal creates mental muscle memory that activates automatically when needed. The final element of daily conditioning is environmental design. Your environment is constantly programming your mind, either for strength or weakness. If your physical space is chaotic, your mental space will be chaotic. If you're surrounded by people who make excuses, you'll start making excuses. If you consume content that promotes victim mentality, you'll start thinking like a victim. Mentally dominant people design their environment to reinforce the identity they're building. They surround themselves with books, quotes, images, and people that remind them of their highest self. They eliminate inputs that reinforce limiting beliefs and amplify inputs that reinforce empowering beliefs. They understand that they become what they repeatedly expose themselves to. Chapter 7. Focus that cuts through any distraction. In a world designed to fragment your attention, the ability to maintain laser-focused concentration has become a superpower. Most people have the attention span of a goldfish, constantly switching between tasks, checking notifications, and allowing every random thought to derail their focus. They live in a state of continuous, partial attention, never fully present for anything important. This scattered attention is not just inconvenient, it's devastating to your mental strength. When you can't control your focus, you can't control your thoughts. When you can't control your thoughts, you can't control your emotions. When you can't control your emotions, you can't control your actions. Everything starts with attention. Mentally strong individuals understand that attention is the most valuable resource you have. It's more valuable than time, because time without attention is worthless. You can sit at your desk for 8 hours, but if your attention is scattered across social media, random thoughts, and meaningless distractions, you've accomplished nothing. But with trained attention, you can accomplish in 1 hour what others accomplish in 8. The first step in developing intimidating focus is understanding what you're fighting against. Your attention is under constant assault from forces that profit from your distraction. Social media platforms, news websites, entertainment companies. They've hired teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to make their content as addictive as possible. They're literally rewiring your brain to crave distraction. Every notification, every breaking news alert, every urgent email is training your brain to expect constant stimulation. This creates what researchers call attention residue. Part of your mind remains fixated on the last thing you looked at, even when you're trying to focus on something else. Most people are operating with severe attention residue all day long. Breaking free from this requires what can only be described as digital detox. You must deliberately reduce your exposure to attention-hijacking stimuli. Turn off notifications. Create specific times for checking email and social media instead of responding to every ping. Design periods of your day where you're completely unreachable by digital distractions. But eliminating distractions is only half the battle. The other half is training your brain to sustain attention on command. This requires deliberate practice, just like building physical strength. Most people never train their attention, then wonder why they can't concentrate when it matters. The most effective attention training method is what neuroscientists call sustained attention meditation. This is different from relaxation meditation. You're not trying to empty your mind. You're training it to hold a single point of focus for extended periods. You might focus on your breath, a specific word, or even a mental image. But the key is returning your attention to that focal point every time it wanders. This is not easy, especially in the beginning. Your mind will resist like a wild horse being broken. It will generate urgent thoughts about things you need to do, problems you need to solve, and worries you need to address. These are all diversions designed to pull you away from the discomfort of sustained focus. Every time you gently return your attention to your chosen focus point, you're strengthening your attention muscle. Advanced focus training involves what military psychologists call tactical breathing. This technique was developed for soldiers who need to maintain perfect focus while under extreme stress. You breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, and hold empty for 4 counts. This pattern activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms your mind and sharpens your focus. But the most powerful focus technique is emotional engagement. Your brain naturally focuses on what it finds emotionally significant. This is why you can scroll social media for hours without effort, but struggle to read a book for 20 minutes. Social media is designed to trigger emotional responses constantly. While many important tasks feel emotionally neutral, the solution is to consciously create emotional significance around the things that matter. Before starting any important task, remind yourself why it matters, how it connects to your larger goals, and what achieving it will mean for your future. Create an emotional reason to stay focused instead of relying on willpower alone. Another critical aspect of intimidating focus is what psychologists call cognitive load management. Your brain has limited processing power, and every decision, worry, and incomplete task consumes some of that power. People with scattered focus are usually carrying massive cognitive loads. They're trying to remember dozens of tasks, juggling multiple projects, and keeping track of numerous commitments all in their heads. This mental clutter makes sustained focus nearly impossible. It's like trying to have a conversation in a noisy restaurant. The background noise makes it impossible to concentrate on what matters. Mentally strong individuals systematically reduce their cognitive load by capturing everything in external systems, batching similar tasks together, and eliminating non-essential commitments. The ultimate goal is developing what researchers call flow state, a condition where your focus becomes so intense that everything else disappears. Time seems to stop. Self-consciousness vanishes. You become completely absorbed in what you're doing. This is where peak performance happens, where breakthrough insights occur, where your best work gets done. Flow state occurs when the challenge level of your task perfectly matches your skill level. If the task is too easy, you get bored. If it's too hard, you get anxious. But when it's perfectly calibrated, difficult enough to require your full attention, but not so difficult that you feel overwhelmed, your brain enters this optimal state of focus. People who consistently access flow state appear to operate from a different reality. They produce work that seems impossible to others. They solve problems that others consider unsolvable. They accomplish in months what others struggle to accomplish in years. This isn't because they're more intelligent. It's because they've trained their attention to levels that others find intimidating. Chapter 8. Strategic Resilience Under Pressure. Pressure reveals character. When everything is going well, anyone can appear strong, confident, and capable. But when the stakes are high, when time is short, when everyone else is panicking, that's when you discover who you really are. That's when mental weakness gets exposed and mental strength shines. Most people crumble under pressure because they've never learned to see it as anything other than a threat. Their nervous system interprets pressure as danger, flooding their body with stress hormones that cloud their thinking, tighten their muscles, and trigger fight or flight responses. Under pressure, they become reactive instead of strategic, emotional instead of logical, scattered instead of focused. But individuals with strategic resilience have rewired their relationship with pressure entirely. They don't just tolerate pressure, they thrive under it. They understand that pressure is not something that happens to them, but something they can learn to use as fuel. They've trained their nervous system to interpret pressure as excitement rather than threat. This transformation begins with understanding what pressure actually is. Pressure is simply the gap between what's expected and what's currently happening, amplified by time constraints and consequence awareness. The bigger the gap, the tighter the timeline, the higher the stakes, the more pressure you feel. But pressure itself is neutral. It's your interpretation of pressure that determines whether it strengthens you or weakens you. Mentally weak people interpret pressure as evidence that something is wrong, that they're in danger, that they might fail. This interpretation triggers stress responses that make failure more likely. Mentally strong people interpret pressure as evidence that they're pursuing something important, that they have an opportunity to prove themselves, that they're exactly where they need to be to grow stronger. The first component of strategic resilience is what psychologists call cognitive reframing. Instead of thinking, "I'm under too much pressure," you think, "I'm in a high-performance situation." Instead of, "What if I fail?" you think, "What can I learn from this?" Instead of, "This is too hard," you think, "This is exactly the challenge I need to level up." This isn't positive thinking or self-deception. This is strategic thinking. You're choosing the interpretation that serves your performance instead of the interpretation that sabotages it. You're using your cognitive flexibility to frame situations in ways that enhance rather than diminish your capabilities. The second component is physiological regulation. Your body's stress response is designed to help you survive physical threats by redirecting blood flow away from your thinking brain toward your muscles. But most modern pressure situations require more thinking, not more muscle. You need to override your body's ancient programming with conscious breathing and posture control. The most effective technique for this is what Special Forces operatives call box breathing. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, hold empty for 4 counts. This pattern activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which tells your brain that you're safe, which allows blood flow to return to your prefrontal cortex, which restores clear thinking under pressure. Your posture also sends signals to your brain about how you should feel. Slouched shoulders and a hunched back tell your brain you're defeated. Straight spine open chest, and raised chin tell your brain you're confident and capable. Navy SEALs are trained to maintain perfect posture under extreme pressure because they understand that how you hold your body influences how your brain interprets the situation. The third component of strategic resilience is what military strategists call scenario planning. Most people are devastated by unexpected challenges because they've never mentally rehearsed how to handle them. They approach high-pressure situations hoping everything goes according to plan, which means they're completely unprepared when things inevitably go wrong. Mentally resilient individuals prepare for multiple scenarios. They ask themselves, what's the best-case outcome? What's the worst case? What's most likely to actually happen? What are 3 things that could go wrong? And how would I handle each one? This mental rehearsal creates familiarity with difficulty, which reduces the shock when challenges arise. They also practice what philosophers call negative visualization, imagining losing everything they value and considering how they would rebuild. This isn't pessimism, it's preparation. When you've mentally rehearsed handling loss, actual setbacks feel manageable rather than devastating. You develop confidence in your ability to recover from anything. Another crucial element of pressure performance is what athletes call process focus. When the stakes are high, most people become outcome obsessed. They think about winning or losing, success or failure, approval or rejection. This outcome focus creates anxiety because outcomes are largely outside your control. Mentally resilient people focus on process instead of outcome. They identify the specific actions they need to take and pour their attention into executing those actions with excellence. They can't control whether they win, but they can control how well they prepare, how clearly they think, how effectively they execute their strategy. This process focus creates what psychologists call effortless effort, a state where you're working at maximum capacity, but feeling relaxed and natural. Professional athletes describe being in the zone during crucial moments. This isn't magic. It's the result of training their attention to stay on process rather than getting hijacked by outcome anxiety. The final component of strategic resilience is building what researchers call stress inoculation. Just like vaccines expose you to small amounts of harmful bacteria to build immunity, stress inoculation exposes you to manageable amounts of pressure to build psychological immunity. This means deliberately putting yourself in pressurized situations when the stakes are lower. Practice public speaking when it doesn't matter for your career. Have difficult conversations when relationships aren't on the line. Take on challenging projects when failure won't be catastrophic. Each time you perform under pressure, you're building confidence in your ability to handle pressure. People with intimidating resilience have usually done this so consistently that pressure feels normal to them. What overwhelms others feels routine to them. They've conditioned their nervous system to operate optimally under conditions that break most people. Chapter 9. Mental training that builds unshakable confidence. True confidence, the kind that makes others instinctively recognize you as someone who operates from a higher level, is not built through affirmations, positive thinking, or pretending you feel different than you do. Real confidence is built through evidence. Specifically, evidence that you can handle whatever life throws at you, that you can overcome obstacles, and that you can trust yourself to figure things out. Most people confuse confidence with arrogance or self-deception. They think confidence means feeling good about yourself, regardless of reality, or believing you can do anything regardless of evidence. This kind of false confidence crumbles the moment it encounters real challenge because it's built on wishes rather than proof. Genuine confidence is built on a foundation of demonstrated capability. It's the quiet certainty that comes from having tested yourself against difficult circumstances and discovered that you're stronger than you thought. It's the deep knowing that even if you don't know how to handle something right now, you have the capability to learn, adapt, and figure it out. This kind of confidence is intimidating to others because it's unshakable. It doesn't require external validation or favorable circumstances. It doesn't crumble when criticized or challenged. It doesn't need others to agree with it. It exists independently of other people's opinions because it's based on your own track record of overcoming difficulty. Building this level of confidence requires what psychologists call mastery experiences. Situations where you succeed at something that initially seemed impossible or frightening. Each mastery experience adds to your confidence bank account, creating a growing body of evidence that you're capable of more than you realized. But here's the key. These mastery experiences must involve real difficulty. If you only succeed at easy things, you don't build real confidence. If challenges are artificial or consequences are minimal, your brain doesn't register them as meaningful evidence. You need to succeed at things that actually matter, things that actually scare you, things where failure would actually be costly. This is why comfort zone expansion is essential for confidence building. Your comfort zone is not just about what you're used to, it's about what your brain considers safe based on past experience. When you operate only within your comfort zone, you never generate evidence that you can handle more challenging situations. Every time you successfully navigate something outside your comfort zone, you expand your sense of what's possible for you. Your brain updates its assessment of your capabilities. You build what researchers call self-efficacy, the belief that you can influence events affecting your life. The most effective way to build this evidence systematically is through what military trainers call progressive stress exposure. You start with challenges that are slightly outside your comfort zone but still manageable. As you succeed at one level, you gradually increase the difficulty. Each success builds confidence for the next challenge. This might mean starting with small social risks if you struggle with social confidence, asking for a discount at a coffee shop, making eye contact with strangers, starting conversations with people you don't know. Each small success builds evidence that social interaction isn't dangerous, which makes bigger social risks feel more manageable. For professional confidence, it might mean taking on projects that are slightly beyond your current skill level, speaking up in meetings when you usually stay quiet, proposing ideas even when you're not sure they'll be accepted, volunteering for assignments that require you to learn new skills. Each professional success expands your sense of what you're capable of achieving. The key is making sure that challenges are real. Your brain can tell the difference between meaningful accomplishments and artificial ones. Succeeding at something with no real stakes doesn't build real confidence. You need skin in the game. You need to care about the outcome. You need there to be real consequences for failure. Another crucial component of confidence building is what psychologists call attribution training. This involves consciously choosing how you interpret your successes and failures. Most people have been programmed to attribute their successes to luck and their failures to personal inadequacy. This programming destroys confidence systematically. Confident individuals have learned to reverse this pattern. When they succeed, they acknowledge the role of effort, preparation, and smart decision-making. When they fail, they focus on what they can learn and how they can improve rather than what's wrong with them personally. This creates a learning mindset that maintains confidence even through setbacks. This doesn't mean taking credit for things that were actually lucky or refusing to acknowledge when you make mistakes. It means balanced attribution, recognizing both your contributions to successes and the lessons available in failures. It means seeing yourself as someone who gets results through effort, rather than someone who gets lucky or unlucky. Physical training is also essential for building unshakable confidence, because it provides direct, undeniable evidence of your ability to get stronger through effort. When you consistently push your body beyond its comfort zone and witness it adapting and improving, you develop trust in your ability to grow stronger in other areas as well. This is why physically weak people often struggle with general confidence, while physically strong people often carry themselves with quiet assurance. Physical strength creates a deep, embodied knowing that you can handle intensity, that you can persist through discomfort, that you can push through when things get difficult. The mental aspect of physical training is just as important as the physical benefits. Every time you exercise when you don't feel like it, you're building evidence that you can do hard things even when motivation is low. Every time you complete a workout that you wanted to quit, you're proving to yourself that your commitment is stronger than your comfort. The final element of confidence building is what researchers call identity integration. This means aligning your self-concept with the evidence you're building. Many people accumulate impressive accomplishments, but still see themselves as inadequate because they haven't updated their identity to match their capabilities. This integration requires consciously acknowledging your growth, celebrating your victories, and updating your self-talk to reflect your expanding capabilities. Instead of, "I got lucky," you say, "I made that happen." Instead of, "I'm not good at this," you say, "I'm still learning this." Instead of, "I can't handle pressure," you say, "I'm getting better at handling pressure." True confidence is not something you feel, it's something you know. You know because you have evidence. You know because you've tested yourself. You know because you've built a track record of figuring things out, bouncing back from setbacks, and growing stronger through challenge. Chapter 10. The Psychology of Mental Intimidation. There's something unsettling about encountering someone whose mind cannot be manipulated, whose emotions cannot be hijacked, and whose focus cannot be scattered. This person doesn't need to be aggressive or boastful. Their very presence creates a psychological effect that makes others acutely aware of their own mental limitations. This intimidation is not the result of trying to intimidate others. It's the natural consequence of operating from a level of mental mastery that most people have never experienced. When someone has achieved true control over their thoughts, emotions, and attention, it creates a stark contrast with the mental chaos that most people live in daily. The intimidation begins with your relationship to external validation. Most people are addicted to other people's approval. They modify their opinions based on what others think. They change their behavior to fit in. They compromise their values to avoid conflict. They live in constant fear of judgment, criticism, or rejection. When someone encounters a person who genuinely doesn't need their approval, it creates cognitive dissonance. They're used to having psychological leverage over others through the threat of withdrawal of approval. When this leverage doesn't work, when someone remains unaffected by their opinion, it makes them question their own influence and importance. This independence from external validation is not indifference or rudeness. It's the quiet confidence that comes from having developed internal validation systems. You know your own worth. You trust your own judgment. You don't need others to agree with you to maintain your sense of self-worth. The second source of intimidation is emotional regulation under pressure. Most people are emotional slaves who wear their feelings on their sleeves. When they're stressed, everyone knows it. When they're angry, everyone feels it. When they're afraid, everyone sees it. Their emotional state becomes everyone else's problem. But when someone maintains emotional composure in situations where others are losing their minds, it creates an unsettling contrast. Others begin to question why they're so reactive while this person remains calm. They wonder if they're missing something, if they're overreacting, if they're weaker than they thought. This composure is particularly intimidating in conflict situations. Most people either become aggressive when challenged or collapse under pressure. They either attack or retreat. But someone with true mental mastery responds with measured strength. They neither escalate nor capitulate. They remain centered while chaos swirls around them. The third element of psychological intimidation is intellectual independence. Most people think what they're supposed to think. They adopt opinions from their social group, their media consumption, or their cultural background without much critical examination. They're intellectual followers who go along with prevailing narratives. When someone thinks independently, asks difficult questions, and reaches conclusions based on evidence rather than social pressure, it makes others uncomfortable with their own intellectual laziness. They realize they've been accepting ideas without examination, while this person has been thinking for themselves. This doesn't mean being contrarian or disagreeing just to be different. It means having the courage to think through issues completely, even when your conclusions might be unpopular. It means changing your mind when evidence suggests you should, regardless of what others might think about your change of position. Another intimidating quality is what psychologists call outcome independence. Most people are desperately attached to specific outcomes. They need things to work out exactly as planned. They're devastated when reality doesn't match their expectations. They try to control people and circumstances to get the results they want. Someone with outcome independence cares about results but doesn't need specific outcomes to maintain their emotional equilibrium. They prefer certain outcomes but can adapt when things don't go according to plan. This flexibility is intimidating because it means they can't be controlled through threats or promises about potential outcomes. This independence extends to material possessions, social status, and even relationships. While they may enjoy these things, their happiness and self-worth don't depend on them. This makes them impossible to manipulate through offers of gain or threats of loss. The ability to make difficult decisions without agonizing is another intimidating quality. Most people are paralyzed by important decisions. They overthink every option, seek endless input from others, and delay choosing until circumstances force a decision. They're afraid of making the wrong choice, so they often make no choice at all. Mentally strong individuals gather necessary information, consider likely consequences, and make decisions decisively. They understand that perfect information is never available, and that delaying decisions is itself a decision. They're willing to be wrong and adjust course rather than remain paralyzed by uncertainty. This decisiveness is intimidating because it demonstrates a level of self-trust that others lack. They trust their ability to handle consequences, learn from mistakes, and adapt to new information. This trust allows them to act while others are still debating. Perhaps the most intimidating quality is the ability to maintain standards regardless of circumstances. Most people lower their standards when things get difficult. They compromise their values under pressure. They abandon their principles when it becomes inconvenient to maintain them. They have situational ethics that change based on what's easy or profitable. Someone with uncompromising standards maintains their principles even when it costs them. They do what they say they'll do, even when it becomes difficult. They treat people with respect, even when others don't deserve it. They maintain their integrity, even when no one is watching. This consistency is intimidating because it highlights everyone else's inconsistency. It makes others aware of how often they compromise, how frequently they take the easy path, how regularly they violate their own stated values. The psychological effect of encountering this level of mental mastery is profound. It forces people to confront the gap between who they are and who they could become. It makes them aware of their own mental limitations in a way that's impossible to ignore. Some people respond to this intimidation with respect and curiosity. They recognize mental strength when they see it and want to learn how to develop it themselves. They're inspired by the example and motivated to grow. But others respond with hostility and criticism. They try to tear down what they can't understand. They look for flaws, spread rumors, or attempt to provoke emotional reactions. They can't handle the mirror that mental strength holds up to their own weakness. Understanding this psychology is important because it prepares you for the reactions you'll encounter as you develop genuine mental strength. Not everyone will appreciate your growth. Some will actively resist it. But their resistance is confirmation that you're becoming someone who operates from a higher level than most people ever achieve. Chapter 11. The War Within and How to Win It. Deep inside you, there's a war raging. It's not a metaphorical war. It's a literal, biological, neurological battle between two versions of yourself. On one side stands the person you could become. Confident, disciplined, mentally unbreakable, operating from a place of strength and clarity that most people never experience. On the other side stands your current programming, the collection of fears, doubts, limitations, and survival mechanisms that have kept you safe but small. This war is being fought every moment of every day. When you wake up in the morning, both sides are recruiting for your attention. The strong version of you wants to get up immediately, exercise, meditate, tackle important tasks. The programmed version wants to hit snooze, check your phone, ease into the day with comfort and distraction. When you face a challenging situation, the strong version wants to lean into difficulty, learn, grow, and prove what you're capable of. The programmed version wants to avoid risk, stay comfortable, and maintain the status quo. Most people lose this war because they don't even realize it's happening. They think the thoughts in their head are neutral, that the resistance they feel toward growth is natural, that the voice telling them to quit when things get difficult is just realistic assessment. They've never learned to distinguish between their authentic self and their conditioning. But once you become conscious of this internal battle, everything changes. You realize that every moment of resistance, every excuse, every rationalization for avoiding what you know you should do is actually the old programming trying to maintain control. It's not you. It's the part of you that was programmed by past failures, inherited fears, and societal conditioning to keep you exactly where you are. The first weapon in this internal war is recognition. You must learn to identify when the old programming is speaking versus when your authentic self is guiding you. The old programming always sounds reasonable, always has logical explanations for why you should wait, why you're not ready, why this isn't the right time. It never tells you that you can't. It just gives you very convincing reasons why you shouldn't try right now. Your authentic self, on the other hand, doesn't make excuses. It sees what needs to be done and wants to do it. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions or guaranteed outcomes. It understands that growth happens through action, not analysis. It knows that you become who you need to be by doing what that person would do, not by waiting until you feel like that person. The second weapon is understanding how this programming was installed in the first place. Your brain evolved for survival in an environment very different from the one we live in today. For thousands of years, the humans who survived were the ones who avoided risks, stayed with the tribe, and didn't challenge the status quo. Innovation, individualism, and bold action often led to death. Your modern brain still operates with these ancient survival programs. When you consider starting a business, asking for a promotion, approaching someone you're attracted to, or pursuing any goal that involves uncertainty, your brain interprets this as potential danger. It floods your body with stress hormones, creates anxiety and doubt, and generates very logical-sounding reasons why you should avoid the risk. Understanding this allows you to see resistance for what it really is: an outdated security system trying to keep you safe by keeping you small. When you feel fear about pursuing something important, you can recognize it as your ancient brain trying to protect you from dangers that no longer exist. This doesn't make the fear disappear, but it strips away its authority over your decisions. The third weapon is deliberate counter-programming. If your brain has been programmed to expect failure, avoid risks, and doubt your capabilities, you need to consciously program it with different expectations. This isn't positive thinking. It's neurological training. Every time you choose courage over comfort, action over analysis, growth over safety, you're strengthening neural pathways associated with strength and confidence. But the old programming doesn't give up easily. It will fight back with increased intensity as you start to change. The resistance you feel when trying to break old patterns isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that you're doing something right. You're forcing deeply entrenched neural patterns to change, and they're fighting to maintain their dominance. This resistance manifests in many ways. You might suddenly feel overwhelmed with urgent tasks that distract you from important work. You might experience unusual fatigue when trying to exercise or meditate. You might find yourself having vivid dreams about failure or catastrophe. Your mind might generate compelling arguments for why your new goals are unrealistic, or why you should focus on other priorities first. These are all symptoms of your old programming trying to regain control. Understanding this allows you to persist through the resistance instead of interpreting it as evidence that you should quit. The resistance is temporary, but the transformation that results from pushing through it is permanent. The fourth weapon is what psychologists call implementation intentions. Instead of relying on motivation or willpower, you create specific if-then plans for how you'll respond when the old programming tries to reassert control. If I feel like skipping my workout, then I'll put on my exercise clothes and commit to just 5 minutes. If I start making excuses about why I can't pursue my goals, then I'll write down 3 small actions I can take immediately. These predetermined responses bypass the internal negotiation that usually leads to compromise and procrastination. When resistance arises, you don't debate it or try to overcome it with willpower. You simply execute your predetermined plan. This removes the decision-making process that the old programming uses to regain control. The fifth weapon is understanding that this war is winnable. But it requires sustained effort. Mental transformation doesn't happen through dramatic moments of insight. It happens through thousands of small choices made consistently over time. Every time you choose the strong option instead of the comfortable option, you win a small battle. Every time you act in alignment with who you want to become instead of who you've been, you claim more territory in this internal war. The cumulative effect of these small victories is profound. Over time, the strong neural pathways become dominant, while the weak ones atrophy from disuse. The voice of your authentic self gets louder, while the voice of your programming gets quieter. What once required enormous effort becomes natural and automatic. But here's the crucial understanding. This war never completely ends. Even after achieving significant mental strength, the old programming can reassert itself during periods of stress, uncertainty, or major life changes. The difference is that you'll recognize it immediately. You'll have tools to counter it. And you'll know with certainty that you can win any battle with your former limitations. This is what separates people with intimidating mental strength from everyone else. They've fought this internal war consciously and systematically until they achieved decisive victory. They no longer operate from old programming, they operate from conscious choice. They no longer react to circumstances. They respond with intentionality. They no longer let fear make their decisions. They let their highest self determine their actions. Chapter 12. Advanced Mental Warfare Tactics. Once you understand that mental strength is built through systematic training rather than wishful thinking, you need specific tactics that actually work under pressure. These are not feel-good strategies or motivational techniques. These are psychological warfare tactics that have been tested in the most demanding environments imaginable. The first tactic is what Special Forces operatives call stress inoculation training. Instead of avoiding situations that make you nervous, you deliberately expose yourself to controlled versions of those situations until they no longer trigger stress responses. If public speaking terrifies you, you start by recording yourself speaking alone, then speaking in front of a mirror, then speaking to one person, gradually building up your tolerance until addressing large audiences feels routine. The key is progression and repetition. Your nervous system learns through experience, not through thinking. Every time you successfully navigate a stressful situation, you build evidence that you can handle stress. Your brain updates its threat assessment algorithms based on actual outcomes rather than imagined dangers. But stress inoculation must be approached systematically. If you jump immediately to your biggest fear without proper preparation, you can actually reinforce anxiety instead of building confidence. The exposure must be challenging enough to create growth, but manageable enough to ensure success. You're training your nervous system to stay calm under pressure, not traumatizing yourself with overwhelming challenges. The second tactic is cognitive restructuring under fire. This involves consciously changing your internal dialogue while you're actually experiencing pressure, not just when you're calm and comfortable. Most people practice positive thinking when everything's fine. But when stress hits, their mind reverts to catastrophic thinking patterns. Real cognitive restructuring happens in real time during actual challenges. When you feel your heart rate increasing and your thoughts spiraling toward worst-case scenarios, you interrupt the pattern with predetermined mental scripts. Instead of, "I can't handle this," you think, "This is exactly the kind of challenge I need to grow stronger." Instead of, "What if I fail?" you think, "I'm about to learn something valuable about my capabilities." This requires practice because your brain defaults to familiar thought patterns under pressure. You need to rehearse these new mental scripts so extensively that they become automatic responses. Professional athletes spend thousands of hours practicing not just physical movements, but mental responses to pressure situations. They know exactly what they'll think when they're behind in the score, when they make a mistake, when everything's on the line. The third tactic is what military psychologists call tactical breathing. This isn't just relaxation. It's a combat-proven method for maintaining cognitive function under extreme stress. When your body enters fight or flight mode, breathing becomes shallow and rapid, which reduces oxygen to your brain and impairs decision-making ability. Tactical breathing overrides this response by consciously controlling your respiratory rate. The standard pattern is 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts hold empty, then repeat. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which tells your brain that you're safe, which allows blood flow to return to your prefrontal cortex, which restores clear thinking. But tactical breathing must become so automatic that you can do it without conscious effort during crisis situations. This requires practicing it hundreds of times when you're not stressed, so it's available when you need it most. Elite performers practice this breathing pattern during low-stress activities until it becomes their default response to any challenge. The fourth tactic is compartmentalization protocol. This involves mentally separating immediate performance requirements from long-term outcome concerns. When the stakes are high, most people make their performance worse by thinking about all the things that depend on their success. They imagine how failure will affect their career, their relationships, their self-esteem, their future opportunities. This outcome focus creates what psychologists call choking under pressure. The stakes feel so high that their nervous system interprets the situation as life or death, which triggers survival responses that impair fine motor skills and complex cognitive processing. Their body prepares to fight or flee when what they actually need is calm, precise execution. Compartmentalization separates performance from outcome. You acknowledge the importance of the situation, but focus your attention entirely on the specific actions required for success. You can't control outcomes. You can only control your preparation and execution. By focusing on process instead of results, you keep your nervous system calm and your cognitive abilities sharp. This requires practicing what to focus on in different types of challenging situations. Before entering any high-pressure scenario, you identify the 3 to 5 specific actions that determine success, and you commit to keeping your attention on those actions regardless of what else is happening around you. The 5th tactic is failure integration training. Most people are devastated by failure because they interpret it as evidence of inadequacy rather than information about what needs adjustment. This fear of failure makes them tentative, overthinking, and risk-averse, which paradoxically makes failure more likely. Failure integration involves deliberately seeking out situations where failure is likely and expensive enough to matter, but not catastrophic. You put yourself in challenging situations specifically to practice recovering from setbacks, learning from mistakes, and maintaining confidence despite temporary failures. This trains your brain to see failure as data rather than disaster. When you've failed many times and bounced back stronger each time, you develop genuine confidence in your ability to handle whatever happens. You stop being afraid of failure because you know from experience that you can turn any setback into a comeback. The 6th tactic is what psychologists call identity rehearsal. This involves acting as if you already possess the mental qualities you want to develop, even when you don't feel like you have them yet. If you want to be more confident, you practice confident body language, tone of voice, and decision-making patterns until they become natural. This works because your brain uses your actions to determine your identity. If you consistently act with courage, your brain concludes that you're a courageous person. If you consistently act with discipline, your brain concludes that you're a disciplined person. You literally become what you repeatedly do, regardless of how you feel while you're doing it. But identity rehearsal must be authentic to your values and goals. You're not pretending to be someone else. You're practicing being the version of yourself that you want to become. This requires clarity about what specific qualities you want to develop and commitment to practicing those qualities, even when it feels uncomfortable or unnatural. The 7th tactic is environmental manipulation. Your physical environment constantly sends signals to your brain about how you should think, feel, and behave. If your environment is chaotic, your thoughts will be chaotic. If your environment reinforces weakness, you'll default to weak behaviors. Mental warfare requires designing your environment to trigger the mental states you want to maintain. This means removing inputs that reinforce limiting beliefs and amplifying inputs that reinforce empowering beliefs. You surround yourself with books, images, music, and people that remind you of your potential rather than your limitations. This also involves creating environmental cues that trigger desired behaviors. If you want to exercise consistently, you lay out your workout clothes the night before. If you want to focus better, you create a distraction-free workspace that signals to your brain that this is where serious work happens. Your environment should make good choices easier and bad choices harder. The 8th tactic is pain tolerance training. Mental toughness is fundamentally about your relationship with discomfort. People with weak minds avoid discomfort at all costs, which means they never develop the capacity to handle intensity. People with strong minds deliberately expose themselves to discomfort to expand their comfort zones. This doesn't mean creating unnecessary suffering. It means systematically exposing yourself to controlled discomfort in order to build tolerance. Cold showers when you want warmth. Exercise when you feel tired. Difficult conversations when you want to avoid conflict. Challenging work when you want entertainment. Each time you choose discomfort over comfort, you send a message to your brain that you can handle more than you thought. You build confidence in your ability to tolerate intensity without breaking. This confidence transfers to all areas of life because your brain generalizes from specific experiences to create global beliefs about your capabilities. These tactics work because they're based on how the human nervous system actually operates, rather than how we wish it operated. They acknowledge that mental strength is built through training, not inspiration. They recognize that your brain learns from experience, not from thinking. They accept that lasting change requires systematic effort over time, not dramatic moments of insight. Chapter 13. The final transformation. Becoming truly unbreakable. There comes a moment in the journey of mental development when something fundamental shifts. It's not gradual like the progress that comes before. It's a sudden, unmistakable transformation where you realize that your relationship with difficulty has changed permanently. What once felt threatening now feels like an opportunity. What once triggered fear now triggers curiosity. What once made you want to quit now makes you want to push harder. This transformation doesn't happen because you've eliminated challenges from your life. It happens because you've built such a strong foundation of mental discipline that challenges no longer have the power to destabilize you. You've become what psychologists call anti-fragile. Not just resilient, but actually strengthened by stress and difficulty. The first sign of this transformation is what researchers call emotional independence. You no longer need favorable circumstances to feel confident. You don't need other people's approval to feel worthy. You don't need everything to go according to plan to maintain your sense of well-being. Your emotional state becomes internally generated rather than externally dependent. This doesn't mean you stop caring about outcomes or become indifferent to other people's opinions. It means you stop needing specific outcomes to maintain your equilibrium. You prefer success, but you don't require it. You appreciate approval, but you don't depend on it. You enjoy favorable circumstances, but you don't collapse when circumstances become unfavorable. This emotional independence is profoundly unsettling to people who are still emotionally dependent. They can't understand how you remain calm when they're panicking, how you stay confident when they're doubting themselves, how you maintain your standards when they're compromising theirs. Your emotional stability highlights their emotional volatility in ways that make them deeply uncomfortable. The second sign is what military psychologists call threat assessment recalibration. Your brain's threat detection system undergoes fundamental rewiring. Situations that used to trigger fight or flight responses now feel manageable. Challenges that used to seem overwhelming now seem interesting. Setbacks that used to feel devastating now feel like valuable feedback. This happens because you've accumulated extensive evidence that you can handle difficult situations successfully. Your brain has updated its threat assessment algorithms based on your track record of overcoming obstacles. When new challenges arise, your brain references your history of successful problem-solving rather than your history of avoiding difficulty. This recalibration is visible to others in your posture, your tone of voice, your decision-making speed, and your overall demeanor. You carry yourself like someone who has been tested and proven rather than someone who is hoping to avoid being tested. This confidence is intimidating because it's genuine rather than performed. The third sign is what philosophers call outcome independence. You care deeply about your goals and work intensely toward achieving them, but you're no longer attached to specific outcomes in ways that create anxiety or desperation. You understand that you can influence results through your efforts, but you can't control them completely. This detachment allows you to perform at your highest level because you're not handicapped by outcome anxiety. Athletes call this playing loose, giving maximum effort without the tension that comes from needing specific results. When you're not afraid of failure, you're free to take the calculated risks that lead to breakthrough performance. This outcome independence is particularly intimidating to others because it makes you impossible to manipulate through threats or promises. People can't control you by threatening to withhold approval or by offering rewards for compliance. You operate from internal motivation rather than external pressure, which makes you unpredictable to those who are used to controlling others through fear or greed. The fourth sign is what researchers call cognitive sovereignty. You think independently rather than adopting the opinions of your social group, media consumption, or cultural programming. You question assumptions, examine evidence, and reach conclusions based on logic rather than emotion or social pressure. This intellectual independence is profoundly threatening to people who think what they're supposed to think. They can't understand how you remain unmoved by popular opinion, how you maintain positions that are socially unpopular, how you change your mind when evidence suggests you should regardless of what others might think about your change of position. Your willingness to think independently forces others to confront their own intellectual laziness. They realize they've been accepting ideas without examination while you've been thinking for yourself. This makes them question their own beliefs in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. The fifth sign is what psychologists call unconditional self-regard. Your sense of worth becomes independent of your achievements, other people's opinions, or external circumstances. You value yourself as a human being regardless of your successes or failures. This doesn't mean you become complacent or stop striving for excellence. It means your motivation comes from growth and contribution, rather than from trying to prove your worth. This unconditional self-regard is intimidating because it makes you immune to the approval-seeking behaviors that most people use to maintain their self-esteem. You don't need to impress anyone, compete for status, or diminish others to feel good about yourself. This psychological freedom is so rare that others don't know how to relate to it. The sixth sign is what philosophers call present moment mastery. You become fully engaged with whatever is happening right now, rather than being psychologically absent while worrying about the future or ruminating about the past. This presence isn't forced or artificial. It's the natural result of having developed such strong mental discipline that your attention naturally settles where it can be most useful. This presence is intimidating because it means you see and hear things that others miss. You notice details, patterns, and opportunities that escape the attention of people whose minds are scattered across past regrets and future anxieties. Your awareness becomes a competitive advantage that compounds over time. The seventh sign is what researchers call integrated strength. All aspects of your mental development, emotional regulation, cognitive clarity, attentional control, stress resilience, and confidence work together seamlessly rather than requiring conscious effort to maintain. Mental strength becomes your default mode of operation rather than something you have to remember to practice. This integration creates an overall presence that others find compelling but can't quite identify. They sense that you're operating from a different level, but can't pinpoint exactly what makes you different. They know you possess something they lack, but don't understand what it is or how to develop it themselves. The final transformation is the realization that you were never actually limited by anything outside yourself. The obstacles you thought were blocking your path were mostly internal. The people you thought were holding you back were mostly reflecting your own doubts. The circumstances you thought were preventing your success were mostly excuses you were using to avoid taking full responsibility for your results. This realization is simultaneously liberating and sobering. Liberating because it means you have far more control over your life than you ever imagined. Sobering because it means you can no longer blame external factors for your lack of progress. The power to transform your life has always been in your hands. You just needed to develop the mental strength to use it effectively. Once this transformation is complete, you understand that building a mind so strong it scares people was never about intimidating others. It was about freeing yourself from the mental limitations that keep most people trapped in lives of quiet desperation. The intimidation others feel is simply their recognition that you've achieved something they desperately want but don't believe is possible for them. Chapter 14. Living as the Mental Master. Operating from higher consciousness. When you've achieved true mental mastery, you don't just think differently, you exist in a fundamentally different reality. You operate from what researchers call higher consciousness, a state where your decisions come from wisdom rather than reactivity, where your responses emerge from strength rather than fear, where your actions align with your highest values rather than your immediate impulses. This isn't a mystical or spiritual concept. It's a measurable neurological state that can be achieved through systematic mental training. Brain scans of individuals operating from higher consciousness show distinctly different patterns of neural activity compared to people operating from default consciousness. Their prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, decision-making, and emotional regulation, shows increased activity, while their amygdala, responsible for fear responses and reactive emotions, shows decreased activity. The practical effect of this neurological shift is that you become someone who operates primarily from your highest self rather than your conditioned responses. When challenges arise, your first impulse is to ask, "What can I learn from this?" rather than, "How can I avoid this?" When people criticize you, your automatic response is curiosity about whether there's useful feedback rather than defensive anger about perceived attacks. This shift in default responses is profoundly intimidating to others because it highlights the reactivity of their own responses. They notice that you remain calm when they become agitated, that you seek understanding when they seek to be understood, that you take responsibility when they make excuses. Your presence becomes a mirror that reflects their own unconscious patterns back to them. Living from higher consciousness means you've transcended what psychologists call ego-based decision-making. Most people make choices based on protecting their self-image, seeking approval, avoiding discomfort, or proving their worth. These ego-based motivations create predictable patterns of behavior that can be easily manipulated by others who understand how the ego operates. But when you operate from higher consciousness, your decisions come from a different place entirely. You choose actions based on what serves your growth, What contributes to others' well-being? What aligns with your deepest values? And what moves you toward your most important goals? This makes your behavior unpredictable to people who are used to manipulating others through ego appeals. The first characteristic of higher consciousness is what philosophers call perspective transcendence. You can step outside your immediate circumstances and view situations from multiple angles simultaneously. When conflict arises, you can see not just your own position, but also the perspectives of others involved. When problems emerge, you can zoom out to see both immediate challenges and long-term implications. This perspective transcendence allows you to make decisions that others can't understand because they're trapped in narrow viewpoints. You might choose short-term difficulty to achieve long-term growth. You might prioritize principles over profit. You might seek truth over comfort. These choices seem irrational to people operating from limited perspectives. The second characteristic is what psychologists call emotional sovereignty. Your emotional state becomes internally generated rather than externally determined. You feel what's appropriate for the situation rather than being hijacked by automatic emotional reactions. You experience emotions fully without being controlled by them. This emotional sovereignty is deeply unsettling to people who are emotionally reactive because it means you can't be controlled through emotional manipulation. They can't make you angry by provoking you, guilty by shaming you, or fearful by threatening you. Your emotions serve your intelligence rather than overriding it. The third characteristic is what researchers call integrated awareness. You maintain simultaneous awareness of your thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and environmental factors without being overwhelmed by any single stream of information. This allows you to respond to situations with all relevant data, rather than reacting to whatever is loudest or most immediate. This integrated awareness gives you a significant advantage in any situation because you're operating with more complete information than people who are focused on single aspects of their experience. You notice things others miss, you anticipate developments others don't see coming, and you make connections others don't recognize. The fourth characteristic is what philosophers call compassionate detachment. You care deeply about outcomes without being emotionally dependent on specific results. You work intensely toward your goals without being devastated if you don't achieve exactly what you intended. You love people deeply without needing them to be different than they are. This compassionate detachment allows you to maintain your effectiveness even in highly emotional situations. While others are being pulled into drama, reactivity, or desperation, you remain centered and strategic. This makes you an anchor of stability that others either find deeply comforting or profoundly threatening. The fifth characteristic is what psychologists call authentic power. Your influence comes from who you are rather than what position you hold or what leverage you possess over others. People follow your guidance because they trust your judgment, not because they fear consequences or hope for rewards. This authentic power is intimidating because it can't be faked or bought. It develops only through years of inner work, consistent character development, and demonstrated wisdom under pressure. It makes positional power, power based on titles, wealth, or authority, seem shallow and temporary by comparison. The sixth characteristic is what researchers call systematic thinking. You naturally consider second and third order consequences of decisions rather than just immediate effects. You see how individual actions connect to larger patterns and long-term outcomes. You understand that everything is connected to everything else in ways that most people don't perceive. This systematic thinking allows you to make decisions that seem counterintuitive to people who only consider immediate effects. You might invest in relationships that don't provide immediate benefits because you understand their long-term value. You might choose difficult conversations now to prevent bigger problems later. You might sacrifice short-term gains to build long-term capabilities. The seventh characteristic is what philosophers call truth orientation. Your primary commitment is to understanding reality as it actually is, rather than as you wish it were or as others want you to believe it is. You're willing to abandon cherished beliefs when evidence suggests they're incorrect. You're willing to acknowledge uncomfortable truths when denial would be more pleasant. This truth orientation is deeply threatening to people whose psychological stability depends on maintaining comforting illusions. Your commitment to reality forces them to confront the gap between their beliefs and actual circumstances. They often respond by attacking your character rather than addressing the truths you represent. The eighth characteristic is what psychologists call service orientation. Your actions are motivated primarily by contribution rather than consumption. You focus on what you can give rather than what you can get. You measure success by the positive impact you have on others rather than by the benefits you accumulate for yourself. This service orientation is intimidating because it highlights the self-centeredness of people who are primarily motivated by personal gain. They can't understand how you remain motivated without constantly focusing on personal benefits. Your example challenges their assumption that everyone is fundamentally selfish. Living from higher consciousness doesn't mean you become perfect or never make mistakes. It means you operate from your highest self most of the time rather than from your conditioned responses. When you do slip into lower consciousness, which is inevitable given the stresses of modern life, you recognize it quickly and return to centered awareness, without judgment or drama. The ultimate result of operating from higher consciousness is that you become someone who elevates every situation you enter. Your presence raises the consciousness of others through modeling rather than preaching. You don't need to tell people how to live. Your example demonstrates what's possible when someone commits to developing their highest potential. This is why mental mastery appears so intimidating to others. They're not just seeing someone with better self-control or more discipline. They're seeing someone who has transcended the psychological limitations that keep most people trapped in patterns of reactivity, fear, and unconscious behavior. They're witnessing what human beings are capable of when they commit to developing their mental faculties to their fullest potential. Chapter 15. Beyond Fear. Living in Total Mental Freedom. Fear is the ultimate prison warden of the human mind. It guards the door to every possibility, every opportunity, every potential version of yourself that could emerge if you were brave enough to pursue it. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of fear, making small choices, accepting limited options, and convincing themselves that their constrained existence is realistic rather than fearful. But there exists a state of consciousness beyond fear, not the absence of fear, but the transcendence of fear's authority over your decisions. When you reach this state, you don't stop feeling fear, but fear stops controlling your actions. You experience it as information rather than instruction, as a signal rather than a command, as one factor among many rather than the deciding factor in every choice. This freedom from fear's tyranny is the ultimate expression of mental strength. It's what makes certain individuals appear almost superhuman to others. They seem to operate by different rules, to have access to capabilities that normal people lack, to possess a kind of courage that borders on the incomprehensible. But this isn't supernatural, it's the natural result of systematically dismantling fear's authority over your mind. The journey beyond fear begins with understanding what fear actually is versus what we've been taught to believe it is. Fear is not a prediction of disaster. It's your brain's attempt to keep you alive by keeping you away from anything unfamiliar. Your ancient mind cannot distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a job interview, between physical danger and emotional risk, between life-threatening situations and growth opportunities. Every time you avoid something because it feels scary, you're allowing your ancient survival programming to make decisions for your modern life. You're letting fear designed for primitive threats prevent you from pursuing sophisticated opportunities. You're giving authority over your choices to a part of your brain that knows nothing about the world you actually live in. Fear maintains its authority through a simple but devastating strategy. It makes avoidance feel like wisdom. When you don't pursue the relationship you want, fear tells you that you're being realistic about rejection. When you don't start the business you dream about, fear tells you that you're being responsible about financial risk. When you don't speak up for your ideas, fear tells you that you're being humble rather than cowardly. This rationalization system is so sophisticated that most people never recognize when fear is making their decisions for them. They believe they're being logical, practical, and mature when they're actually being controlled by ancient programming that has no understanding of modern opportunities and challenges. Breaking fear's authority requires recognizing these rationalizations for what they are: sophisticated excuses for avoiding growth. Every time you find yourself with logical reasons for not pursuing something important, you need to ask whether those reasons are actually wisdom or whether fear is using your intelligence against you. The first step toward freedom from fear is developing what researchers call fear literacy. This means learning to distinguish between different types of fear and responding appropriately to each type. Physical danger, fear. The fear that warns you about actual threats to your safety should be respected and heeded. But psychological fear, the fear of embarrassment, rejection, failure, or discomfort, should be acknowledged but not obeyed. Most people treat all fear as if it were physical danger fear. They respond to the possibility of social rejection with the same urgency they'd respond to the possibility of physical attack. They avoid psychological discomfort with the same intensity they'd avoid stepping into traffic. This overreaction to psychological fear keeps them trapped in increasingly narrow comfort zones. Fear literacy involves learning to evaluate each fearful feeling based on whether it's warning you about actual danger or just unfamiliarity. Is this fear protecting you from harm, or is it protecting you from growth? Is it keeping you safe, or is it keeping you small? Is it serving your survival, or is it limiting your potential? Once you develop fear literacy, you can begin practicing what psychologists call fear processing. Instead of automatically avoiding whatever triggers fear, you pause to examine the fear itself. What specifically am I afraid will happen? What evidence do I have that this outcome is likely? What evidence do I have that I couldn't handle this outcome if it did occur? What am I missing by letting this fear make my decision? This examination process strips fear of its unconscious authority over your choices. When you shine the light of conscious analysis on fearful thoughts, most of them reveal themselves to be either completely irrational or massively overblown. You realize that the catastrophic outcomes you've been avoiding are either extremely unlikely or far more manageable than you assumed. The next step is what researchers call graduated fear exposure. This involves systematically approaching the things that scare you in manageable increments. If public speaking terrifies you, you don't start with a TED Talk. You start by speaking up in small meetings, then presenting to your team, then addressing larger groups, gradually building your tolerance for the discomfort of being seen and heard. Each successful exposure provides evidence that contradicts fear's predictions. Every time you do something that scared you and survive, better yet, thrive, you weaken fear's credibility with your subconscious mind. Your brain begins to trust your actual capabilities rather than fear's pessimistic assessments. But graduated exposure must be approached systematically rather than impulsively. If you jump too quickly to challenges that are genuinely beyond your current capabilities, you can reinforce fear rather than overcome it. The exposure must be challenging enough to create growth but manageable enough to ensure success most of the time. Advanced fear transcendence involves what philosophers call identity shifting. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who happens to be afraid, you begin seeing yourself as someone who feels fear but acts with courage anyway. Instead of trying to eliminate fear, you practice acting in alignment with your values despite fear's presence. This identity shift is crucial because it moves you from fighting against fear to transcending fear's authority. You stop trying to become fearless, an impossible goal that leads to frustration and self-judgment, and start becoming someone who feels fear but doesn't let fear make decisions for you. The ultimate goal is not the elimination of fear, but the achievement of what researchers call fear independence. You feel fear when it arises, acknowledge its message, evaluate its accuracy, and then choose your response based on your values and goals rather than fear's recommendations. Fear becomes advisory rather than authoritative. This fear independence creates a psychological freedom that most people never experience. You can pursue any goal, approach any person, take on any challenge, speak any truth, or make any change that aligns with your values, without needing permission from your fear. You become someone who is guided by vision rather than limited by anxiety. The intimidation factor of fear independence cannot be overstated. Most people are so controlled by various fears that they can't imagine operating without fear's permission. When they encounter someone who has achieved genuine freedom from fear's authority, it forces them to confront the extent to which their own lives are constrained by anxieties and avoidance patterns. They see someone taking risks they wouldn't dare take, pursuing goals they wouldn't dare pursue, having conversations they wouldn't dare have, and living with an authenticity they wouldn't dare attempt. This doesn't necessarily inspire them. It often terrifies them because it highlights how much of their potential they've abandoned to maintain the illusion of safety. Fear independence also makes you immune to fear-based manipulation. You can't be controlled through threats because you're not afraid of the consequences they're threatening. You can't be manipulated through anxiety because you don't need certainty to take action. You can't be intimidated because you've already faced your deepest fears and discovered you could handle them. The final stage of mental freedom is the realization that fear was never protecting you from actual dangers. It was protecting you from discovering your actual capabilities. Every time you avoided something because it scared you, you missed an opportunity to find out what you were truly capable of achieving. Every fear you let make decisions for you was a limitation you imposed on your own potential. This realization is both liberating and sobering. Liberating because it means you have access to far more possibilities than you ever imagined. Sobering because it means you've been limiting yourself far more than circumstances have been limiting you. The prison you thought you were trapped in was mostly of your own construction. Living beyond fear doesn't mean living without challenges, setbacks, or difficulties. It means living without the additional suffering that comes from being afraid of challenges, setbacks, or difficulties. You still face real problems, but you don't compound those problems with the anxiety of trying to avoid them or the despair of believing you can't handle them. This is the ultimate mental freedom, the ability to engage fully with life without being paralyzed by the possibility that life might not go according to your plans. You pursue your goals intensely without needing guarantee of success. You love deeply without requiring certainty of reciprocation. You speak honestly without demanding agreement. You act courageously without expecting safety. When you achieve this level of mental freedom, you become someone who operates from possibility rather than limitation, from love rather than fear, from expansion rather than contraction. You live as an example of what human beings are capable of when they refuse to let fear make their decisions for them. This is not just intimidating to others, it's inspiring to those who are ready to begin their own journey beyond fear.